cortisol levels go up, and that's a problem. And that's when we start to make poor decisions, and we start feeling overwhelmed, that feeling of anxiety and depression. It starts with being mindful first, and then we can start to make better decisions. But as soon as people are mindful of what triggers them, then it's an easier job from there. Every day, try and do something that is intentional, where you're actively moving. I think it takes a while for people to acknowledge the fact that when it comes to health and wellness, it's like any skill set. And I don't think everyone picks it up, and not everyone's intentional about it. So I think there's definitely, your food choices will definitely have an impact on the clarity that you have in your thinking as well, without a doubt.
So welcome. My name is Tom. This is Love Your Stress podcast. Today we have a guest, Brad, and we're going to talk about stress in terms of food and nutrition. And before we start, I would love to ask one of the first questions, Brad. How would you like to be remembered? What do you would like to be remembered for?
Oh, that's a very, very good question, Ned. That's a very good question, Tom. I think I like to be remembered as someone that is caring, empathetic, and thoughtful. That's how I like to be remembered. I think in my line of work for the last 10 years, I'm very giving of my time, and I've always put others first in terms of their health and wellness. So I think if I have to put it down to one thing, I would say I would like to be remembered or be known as someone that it has a positive impact on people's lives. I hope I'm seen like that.
Yeah. Is there any specific impact you want to make, like in the area of lives, or something like some specific impact you want to be remembered for?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think where I come from in terms of where I work is that ultimately I want to try and help people live healthier, happier lives. Health and wellness is the space that I've been in the last decade. It's something I've always been highly passionate about. So when I work with my clients, ultimately that is the goal. So we try and look at the big picture, which I like to refer to it as deep health. So we like to look at the big picture. So, it's not only about the aesthetics of what people look like, but it's, mind, body, and soul as well. So, if people want to look aesthetically pleasing to themselves and to others, that's fair enough. That's one thing. But we need to have a big holistic approach. And I know the word holistic gets overused to some degree, but I do like the big picture approach.
I love how you avoid the caveats of overused word of holistic health, holistic picture, and instead of use something that everyone understands quite easily, deep health, that emphasis on everything, looks, the health, the physical, mental. I really love that. Just completely go through the deep health. Okay, easy to understand, simple, no harder to misinterpret. Would you say?
Well, I'm glad you add that, Tom. It's something I have thought about in the past as well, and I think you're quite right. That word holistic does get thrown around. And what is it? I suppose if you Googled it, you could probably find it. But what does it actually mean, holistic, as a big word? And I always like to think that there's pillars in life. We have pillars, and our lives don't work in silos. And I think people try and work themselves in silos. And I often try and communicate. I still work in the health and fitness space within a gym environment. And I often see people putting a huge amount of emphasis on the training aspect. So yes, fair enough. That's one silo. Purposeful movement is one silo. Sleep, stress, those are all silos as well. Relationships with your supportive community or within your family, those are also silos. But invariably what we do is we put all our eggs into one basket. So what we'll do is some people will train, they'll consistently go to the gym 5 times a week, but they won't put any emphasis on their sleep management. They won't put any emphasis on how much water they drink. They won't put any emphasis on their stress management. So when we look at the kind of deep health approach, we're really looking at, fair enough, purposeful movement, that's one pillar. We've got to do that one. We still need to manage our stress. We still need to manage our water. We still need to manage our food. We still need to manage our relationships. We still need to manage our existential thinking, our mindset, our vision, our identity that we see for ourselves. So the deep health thing, I really believe, is encompassing the whole body. So I'm glad you hit that point there, Tom.
Love it. And I really also like the idea how you mentioned about purposeful movements, and I've seen it from so many angles. Because yes, you can go to the gym, you can do all kinds of exercises, but the quality you get out of it will be dependent on type of movements you said. And I really like how you mentioned the purposeful movements. Would you like to talk about that? What do you mean by purposeful movements in your line of work?
Yeah, so Tom's purposeful movement is movement with intention. And I think, really purposeful movement is any kind of movement. And I think, I always try and preach to people is that you must have the always something mentality. And what I mean by the always something mentality is that, not every week is going to be the same for most people. We have, balancing areas of our lives. We've got kids, we've got careers, we've got work, we've got meetings, we've got traffic, we've got all sickness, we've got all kinds of things that we're trying to balance. So yes, fair enough, you can commit yourself to, let's say, 3 times within the week. You go and train at the gym for 3 times in the week, or 4 or 5, whatever it is. But sometimes that may not be possible. Sometimes something might happen and you're not able to do it. But what you can do is when you come home, you can still put a pair of shoes on and you can still go for a walk for 10 minutes. So the always something mindset, that's related to purposeful movement. So in every day, try and do something that is intentional, where you're actively moving. And that's we always talk about consistency, and that will ultimately hold the consistency in what you're doing as well. If you just do something is better than doing absolutely nothing. A walk, it could be, yoga. I know you talk about yoga and you talk about meditation and so forth and all those things. You could do something like that. You could do a 5-minute, stretch, for example. So always something with purposeful movements.
Curious about the aspect you said, intentional, purposeful movement and mindset. How much do you see the idea of having this intention and purpose to sticking to intention, sticking to the habit consistently? Like, do you see a link there? And if you see it, how do you see it reflecting, people actually doing things?
Tom's, I think it takes a while for people to wrap their heads around. And I think I'll use the health and fitness space to kind of get that point across. And I'm going to use people in a training environment, because I've coached within a CrossFit gym for many years, and I own a CrossFit gym. So I've coached people in terms of their movement. And I find when people walk into a gym, and I hope this answers your question, you can just stop me if it doesn't, but when people walk into a gym, I sometimes feel people go to the gym to simply go and exercise, okay? And I think that's a very, very noble thing to do, to go and exercise in the gym. That's 100%, that's perfect. But I think what's important is that when you go to the gym is that you're intentional as to what you're going to do there. And I always like to think of it as that people aren't going to CrossFit training or whatever you're going to the gym to, going to pump iron or whatever you're going to go and do, is you're going there to practice. And the intention is to practice. And when you have the intention to practice things, that's how you improve. And you only if you see it as practice. We all look at everything that we do in life is practicing a skill set. And I like to refer as exercise, or nutrition for that matter, as much like learning a musical instrument. Okay, if you walked into my house and I gave you a guitar, let's hope you don't know how to play guitar, and I gave you a guitar and I said, Toms, I want you to play me a guitar, play me a song. The likelihood of you being able to just take the guitar and play a song. Can you play a guitar, Toms?
Yeah, no.
Okay, well, there we go, So you come into my house and I give you a guitar and say, play me a song. The likelihood of you being able to play a song is very, very unlikely. But if you went to lessons and you had the intention of actually practicing, this week you learned this skill, the next week you learned this skill, next week you learned that. Think of it as a habit. Is that you're building the habit and you're stacking it and you're just slowly progressing with your skill set. Nutrition, exercise, it's exactly the same. Is from a nutrition perspective, is that you're just trying to make improvements. You're trying to learn one thing at a time and slowly learn how to do this stuff over time. You're learning what a protein is and how much calories in a protein, and how much protein should you be eating and how much carbs should you be eating, and meal timing, and when should you put it around exercise. All these lots of little things. And the same thing applies for water consumption and stress management and all the other things when it comes to health and wellness. It's just the process of learning a habit and learning a skill through practice. So the point that you're trying to make there, and I'll just go back to the exercise point, is I think it takes a while for people to acknowledge the fact that when it comes to health and wellness, it's like any skill set, and I don't think everyone picks it up, and not everyone's intentional about it. And I often see people exercising in a gym where they're not doing it to learn that as a skill and to become autonomous. They're ultimately just going to keep on coming back to the gym and having someone coach them the whole time. And I think it's an important thing to acknowledge the fact that you need to be intentional about the skill set that you're learning so that you can ultimately do it on your own. I hope that answers your question. I know we went around the bush on that one.
That's a pretty good answer. And I agree with the same intention that coaching is not to be meant as a crutch for people always coming back to you. And I agree with the idea that setting intention makes it more mindful and deeper experience. You learn the skill faster, and therefore you're able to basically coach yourself at some point.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the right tone with it. Like, coaching isn't meant to be a crutch, and it's all about autonomy. If you work with a coach, whatever it is that coach is going to teach you the skills so that you can do it on your own. You stay because you want to, but ultimately you should have the skill set to go and do that stuff on your own. And I think accountability counts for a lot. I think ultimately people like to have someone to hold them accountable to certain things, without a doubt, even when they know what they need to be doing.
How much in your work you do actually the skill training and accountability, your ideal proportion?
Just repeat that question there, Thomas.
So the idea that you just mentioned, the idea between accountability and learning, teaching people to learn the skill. And you said that sometimes people come just for accountability. So how do you see the healthy balance between these two?
I think for a lot of people, Tom, and that's a great question. I think for a lot of people, and I'll even use myself for example, is that from a business standpoint, I've always consulted on business coaches for guidance and support and accountability as well. And I think that it definitely plays a part, whether it's public accountability or whether it's coach accountability. I think both help. I think when people put themselves out there, and I'll use an example, if someone decided that they want to go and run a marathon, for example, and they put it out in the public space, and they said, hey, everybody, all my Facebook friends, I am going to run a marathon in the next 12 weeks. Okay, so they put it out, public accountability, which I think is great. And then maybe they consulted on a coach, a running coach, and they put it out to the coach, say, listen, coach, this is what I've committed. I've put it out into the world wide web and into the universe. I want to commit for 12 weeks. I want to run this marathon. And I think ultimately, the combination of having public accountability plus coach accountability is a handy thing to have. That structure that the coach will provide you, and obviously having the accountability of someone to be able to check in and support you, and obviously give you a little bit of encouragement as well. It's handy. People can do it on their own for sure. They can do it on their own, 100%. But it's helpful to have someone in your corner to kind of guide you through the process, and certainly when the tough gets going as well.
Yeah, definitely the accountability comes in strong, especially when you're feeling low, especially when you feel stressed. And I feel that's a good place to shift gears a bit and ask one of my favorite questions to my guests is, how do you define stress in your own words?
How would I define stress?
Yeah.
Stress would be a feeling of being overwhelmed due to the tasks that you have at hand. And I think we have different kinds of stress. You get two types. You get a eustress, and then you get distress. And eustress is kind of like the good stress that we have exposure to, and then distress is stress that we feel like we can't manage it. I did a presentation a while back about how stress works on, let's say, if you look at a curve, right? So if you think of someone's career path or their careers, you've got, I'm just trying to think of the linear lines here. So let's say, for example, you've got your level of stress, which should be going up. And then you've got your, I can't remember underneath was time, but essentially it's a bell curve. And how that bell curve works is, if you got a job that doesn't require a lot of attention from you, so you're not stimulated in that job, and there's no stress in it, some people might not feel like they're right for their job because maybe they don't feel stimulated enough. But when you add a little bit of pressure on that, when you add a little bit of stress onto that, it allows them to feel like they're getting something done, there's some enjoyment, there's a challenge, and so forth. But if you add a whole pile of stress on top of that, like a whole pile, like you're stressed out, you just got too much work, that's too much stress. And that's where distress comes in. So eustress is a good amount of stress. Everybody needs to have it. I mean, you go to the gym and you train and you exercise. That's a form of stress. Okay, it's good stress. It stresses you out. You feel great afterwards. But unfortunately, when you've got the bad stress, that's not a good thing, because then it's, cortisol levels go up. And that's a problem, and that's when we start to make poor decisions, and when we start feeling overwhelmed. That's when these, the feeling of like anxiety and depression, whatever that comes into play. So yeah, I think there's definitely a fine balance of how much stress people are exposed to. Pressure is a privilege to some degree.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen how stress affects the decision making, and regarding that, before the conversation, you mentioned how it affects decision making, especially for the nutrition, for the food choices. How do you avoid that? What do you teach your clients how to keep those good food choices, especially when you feel under a heavy load of stress?
Yes. I think sometimes these things happen without us knowing it consciously. And we often do a behavior awareness in order for us to work out what happened half an hour prior, an hour prior, a week prior, maybe even a month prior, because we make decisions based on something that happened prior to making that particular decision. As a good example for this, let's say someone's driving on the home, they're going home from work, and they had a bad day at the office. Maybe their boss laid into them, maybe a project didn't go according to plan, and they're driving, and then they see the petrol station, and they go, and they drive straight into the petrol station, and they go inside the shop, and then while they're in the shop, they go and grab themselves maybe a chocolate, maybe they buy themselves a Coke, but they don't realize that that decision was probably made because of the stress they had prior. So we look at these triggers. So people are triggered by certain things. And when I say, whether it comes from a couple of hours beforehand, a lot of parents, I use it, parents, for example, parents maybe come home and they open up a bottle of wine after the hectic day at work, or, they have a glass of wine because their kids have been crazy. So that's just a form of relaxation, or they're trying to de-stress themselves or kind of deload for the day. But what are the triggers that happen prior to that ultimately lead us to making that? And I think that's what we try and do here, is once we identify what the problem is, whether it's work-related something, or if it's stress-related within the work environment, or whether it's a school environment or parenting, or whether it's in a friendship circle or your spouse, as soon as we can identify what the problem is, then we can simply pause and reflect, and then we can start to make better decisions. So I think it starts with being mindful first, and then we can start to make better decisions. But as soon as people are mindful of what triggers them, then it's an easier job from there.
Yeah, I really love the idea about mindfulness. One of my favorite mantras is be present. And it's all fine and dandy to connect the things that happened today, a couple of hours ago. But you mentioned that it also could be 1 month before. I'm curious, do you have any example to see how something that happened 1 month before, or like really long term? Because people, I can imagine it's kind of hard to connect the dots when it's so a long time before that could have a huge impact on the decision I made today. So do you have any example on that?
Tom's, I can. I think that's a really, really, really good question. And I wanted to relate it to something people eat for different reasons. It's easy to look at someone that might be overweight, who doesn't eat healthy for a particular reason, and just go, it's as simple, just eat less and move more. It's that simple. But sometimes people don't know what's happened to that person's life. So there could have been a particular trauma. There could be something in that person's life that has impacted them in terms of how they eat and what they eat. And that could be a childhood thing. Maybe they grew up in a household when there was a food issue or whatever had happened in their life. And I've actually got a little story. There's an author. He wrote a book. It's called he runs a thing called the Resilience Project, and he's an Australian guy. And in his book, it's called the Resilience Project. In his book, he talks about, and it wasn't the main subject within the book, but this is what I took out of that book. He talks about, and I could just maybe pull the author up here as well just afterwards, but in his book, he talks about the experience of his sister, and the whole book is about building resilience. And he talks about his sister at the beginning of the book, and how she had this eating disorder as a young age, and it went up as she grew older, like into her teens and into her 20s and so forth, that she had this eating disorder. But that eating disorder was related to a childhood incident that she had. Now, that wasn't the crux of the book. But what I took out of the book is that people eat for different reasons. So people have got eating disorders. So yeah, it would be an eating disorder based on something that happened previous in their life. And that's kind of an extreme example. But, whatever baggage within people, whatever trauma that's sitting in their shoulders can also create a stress in their head as well. And that's an internal dialogue what happens as well. So not only it doesn't only have to be external stress that we're exposed to, we can also have internal stress within our heads. And that can sometimes lead us to making certain decisions. If you've got a negative mindset or a fixed mindset, that can also lead you to making, I would say, unfavorable choices as opposed to poor decisions. So if you had to relate it back to, let's say, a month prior or a couple of years prior, there could be something, an impactful situation in your life that lead you to making decisions. Maybe it's a loss in the family. Maybe you lose your father. Maybe you lose a sibling, and that leads you can see people that that start drinking after they lose a loved one, for example. To kind of find a way out. So that would be an example of that.
Yes, I really love how you link together with the trauma, some impactful event in a life that could not have an immediate impact in a physical life, like where you said the weight gain. It could take over time link of bad habits. You don't see the impact immediately. So that's actually quite an interesting point, because I've also noticed many times in my own life that you change some small thing in your life and immediately there is no immediate feedback that you're doing something wrong, and only over a couple of weeks, couple of months, you see that it's either positively or negatively impact the health and or any other aspect of life, like relationships, decision making. And I really like that explanation, because it could be anything like trauma, something simple, but also could be, as I said, someone said you something and you adapt with limiting belief.
It's amazing, and you make a very valid point there, is that it doesn't have to be something big. Everyone's an individual, and we all make decisions individually based on who we are. So how we make decisions based, you might be a little bit more resilient to some degree. Maybe you've had a different upbringing. Maybe I'm a little bit on the sensitive side. So how you deal with an incident is a little bit different to mine. That's why humans need to be looked at as unique individuals, and you can't use a cut and paste system for everybody. It needs to be adjustable for everybody because we're unique. Everyone's different.
And one thing more that I've noticed in many people is that a person might be really resilient and good in health most of the time, until something triggers them, some in other area of life when they feel a bit more insecure, and then kind of everything goes out of the window. And this, as soon as you deal with that seemingly external problem, everything seems to come back, and I always find it fascinating. Do you find similar experience?
Yeah, would you say it would be, someone that manages their health and wellness quite well when things are going right there, but maybe they not so good at, let's say, here's a good example is that we often have, here's an example. Let's say someone that doesn't enjoy public speaking. Have you noticed that and I think even for myself is that when you're just about to go out and speak, maybe now you need the toilet, you need to go to the toilet now. I'm nervous, I need to go to the toilet. So the connection between your brain and your body and your gut, that's where that kind of gut feeling comes from. They definitely work together. So like you could have someone that might want to go and do some public speaking, but they get nervous in their body and they'll make a decision based on their food before they go onto the stage. So yeah, I think there's definitely a connection between how certain people manage different things, without a doubt.
I really love how you mentioned the connection between the brain and gut. And sometimes I've heard even this people going as far as saying that the gut is the second brain. And would you agree to that? And then there's a bit of tricky question regarding that. Who do you think, what is stronger, your brain or gut, brain or gut brain?
Yeah.
So how do you say, where should you start?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's I think there's definitely a correlation between the gut brain. That's where it comes from. And I'm just trying to think of some stats here. There's definitely a correlation between the two, without a doubt. I think in many instances you make the point about what should you trust more? Should you trust your guts more, or should you trust your brain more? And I think there's a lot to be taken out of that. I think in many instances I think we have a gut feeling where we know what's wrong and what's right. And I think that's intuition. That's our basically built-in intuition. I think that's an important thing that we need to read into. Obviously, from an analytical perspective, we still need to think about it. But I think there's a lot to be said for making a decision based on your gut in terms of how you read situations, without a doubt. I would also say that there's a correlation between the food we eat and how it impacts our thinking. So how the food goes into your body, how it goes to the guts, how it's absorbed in the body, and ultimately that will help you obviously have either a fuzzy brain or a clearer brain. I mean, the food we eat definitely has a correlation on how it affects our gut into our brain as well, without a doubt. That's a great question, Thomas.
And just to dive slightly a bit deeper, you said it's a good idea to follow the gut feeling. How would the gut feeling change if you eat crappy food? Would it kind of make the gut feeling completely out of the window as well?
Thomas, I think obviously this will work for different people. I think we're not all built the same. I think some people are capable to eat certain things that other people can't eat. But I think to some degree, people that eat, and this is in my instance, in my case, that if I eat certain foods, then I don't quite have the same mental clarity that I would if I was eating, a cleaner diet. If you put a huge amount of sugar in someone's diet, they might not think as clearly. Maybe their cognitive thinking isn't as smooth as what it would be if they were eating a cleaner diet. So I think there's definitely your food choices will definitely have an impact on the clarity that you have in your thinking as well, without a doubt. A good example is that if you're eating less food, if you're very hungry, I think that's also going to have an impact. There's a fair amount of studies on dehydration and how that impacts your thinking. So I think it's people overlook the importance of food and hydration when it comes to their brain and mental clarity and concentration and performance and cognitive ability. It's definitely an overlooked thing. I think people overlook it.
You mentioned the clean diet, and I know from my experience, when under stress, I tend to conveniently forget what the clean diet is. So I believe it's a good always to remind from different angles and different ways what a clean diet is. So would you like to have like a quick rundown of what do's and don'ts of the clean diet?
Yeah, Toms, I think we live in a modern day society, so I think we can all kind of follow I've always been a firm believer of following kind of like a Paleolithic diet, and I know there's 1,000 million diets and everyone's in a different camp these days. I think nutrition is almost like a new religion, whereas if you're either in the keto camp or you're the carnivore camp or you're vegetarian, and everyone believes in their style of eating. But I think I've always believed in the agnostic approach to nutrition. Is I think that everyone has different needs, everyone has different wants. Not some people, maybe they don't want to eat meat for X, Y, and Z reason. They want to eat vegetarian. That's fine. That's all good. But I think to go back to your question regarding the clean diet, and I think when I said it's a modern world, is that we get exposed to things. I think if you eat, if you can always try and make things fit the plan. And 80% of the time, 90% of the time, if you're eating lean sources of protein, you're eating good hearty sources of vegetables, you're eating your healthy fats, you're eating good clean carbohydrates, not refined stuff, then I think you've got a good approach to yourself. Yes, fair enough, you might eat X, Y, and Z here and there. That's life, and that can still fit the plan. But I think when it comes to a clean diet, and I don't want to use the word clean because what does it actually mean? And I think you made a good point there. But I think when you're looking, a whole food diet would always be the best option for you. You're always going to perform the best on a whole food diet, stuff that comes straight from nature. Fair enough, you'll eat the processed stuff here and there because sometimes it's convenient for you, or if it's just kind of fits the day or fits the time, it's fine. You're not going to die as long as it's mostly whole foods.
And when it comes to the whole foods and these kind of diets, what's your take on supplements and all the protein powders, all these things that may assist you?
Great question, Toms. It's a very, very good question. I think we call them supplements is because we meant to supplement them in our diet. That's kind of like to bolt on the back of it. And I always believe, like, if someone came to me and said, what supplements must I take? And then if I asked the question of, like, what does your nutrition look like? And if I always believe that you've got bigger fish to fry, like if your diet is atrocious, if you don't sleep enough hours, if you don't drink enough water, if you're not managing your stress, then no amount of supplementation is going to help you, irrespective of what supplementation you take. And I think your first port of call should be fixing the stuff that is right around you. Fix what's in your pantry, fix what's in your cupboard, fix what you're putting in your mouth first in terms of your food. Get X amount of hours, the right amount of hours, whatever it's 7 to 9 hours per night, depending on what type of individual you are. Making sure you're hydrating, getting enough water in your body, not over consuming on coffee. And then we can look at supplementation. I think that's just kind of on the bolt-in on the end. I think things like protein supplements, I think can be a convenient way of getting protein in your body as a supplement. So I think I believe in having a protein shake if it fits your needs. It's very practical, it's very convenient, it's very easy to get protein in and lean source of protein. And I must say most people that I work with, whether they're looking to put on muscle, whether they're looking to lose weight, most people that I work with actually undereat on protein. So if I think there was one supplement that you are going to have, is probably going to be a whey protein or a vegan protein. There's obviously supplements that if you went to go and do some blood tests, things like vitamin D, your zinc, magnesium, I think those are crucial as well in your body. So if you are low on those, you probably go to the doctor and get them tested, and then you can supplement with those. But for the most part, a good healthy diet should be the starting point for that. But supplements, I think it's a bit, you can overspend on supplements. Get a supplement for this, get a supplement for that, supplement for this. Next minute you're taking 10 pills in the morning. One for this, one for that, one for that. So yeah, great question, Toms. Great question.
Yeah, and I really loved how you linked supplements with stress and lifestyle, sleep and everything. And if I understood you correctly, I would agree with you on this point, is that it's good to take supplements as long as you don't use it as a crutch to not deal with the actual root cause of why you actually need them. Like if you have lack of sleep or you have too much stress, so why would you need them in the first place? But if you take care of all the things that you need to be taken care of, so why not use them for additional benefit? Is that what you meant?
Absolutely, without a doubt. You know, if someone's got a sleep problem and they're taking sleep tablets, maybe we don't know the backstory as to why they're taking them. Maybe they've got something wrong with them. But the first port of call is to maybe look at your sleep routine. You know, often people will take, cholesterol medication. People will take blood pressure medication. Yes, if it's for medical purposes and they need to get the numbers down. But for the most part, those are dietary changes that they can make to their lifestyle. But the dietary changes and the lifestyle changes are the hardest part, you see. So, you know, you'll have someone that will continue to live the certain lifestyle they're living, but still supplement with a pill that will take away the symptoms of their lifestyle that they're living, if that makes sense. So it's almost like you say, it's like a crutch, it's like a band-aid. It's a band-aid for the lifestyle they're in. They don't want to give up on the lifestyle that they're living. So it's just easier for them to just take a pill and just go, yeah, now I can go and eat whatever I want.
Yeah, the lifestyle changes can be one of the most scariest things out there. And on that note, I would love to wrap up the podcast here and ask one of the final questions I love to ask. And it's about the title, Love Your Stress. What do you make of it?
Tom, I love that title. I think it's, like I said at the beginning, is pressure is a privilege to some degree. I think you can put your stress to good use in good ways. I think we need adversity. In order for people to grow, we need adversity. We need challenges in life. So yeah, I think when you said that, love your stress, I think it's a valuable thing. I think we must put our stress to good use as opposed to not being something that's negative.
Yeah, when you say the idea about adversity, I always feel like it's the same thing when you go to the gym. In order to build muscles, you actually need a bit of resistance. And I would apply the same for every area of life, be decision making, nutrition, and so that's how I see the world. And one of the last questions I love to ask for you is, do you have any recommendations for the next guest you would think would add value to the podcast on topic of your stress?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a very, very good question. I'm trying to think. Is this someone in our circle that we know?
Anyone that usually what I encourage my guests to do, the first name popping in your head is usually the best answer because that's the intuitive one. And it helps you from overthinking it too much.
Yes. I think Sean Tucker, who's within our own circle as well. I think he'd be a good guy to come in here. I think he also deals with high profile individuals that also have stress. I think anyone that's in the high profile position within a corporate building or within they have their own business, I think there's always going to be some kind of stress. So I think he'd be a good guest for sure.
Awesome. And on that note, the final question to you is, who would you like to work with, and what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Tom, that's a great question, and thanks for asking. I like to work with people who want accountability, who like accountability, people that are 40 years or 35 years plus, that are looking to make a change to their life, that may have let things go a little bit from their early days, and they want their old younger bodies back and their old younger lifestyles back. So both mentally and physically, you know, whether it's a woman or a man. And if they want to get hold of me, they can find me on my website, which is bradstrydom.com.au. And I offer a free kind of call that we can hop on and just discuss what their goals are, what their challenges are, and how we can bridge the gap between the two.
Awesome. So really, thank you, Brad, for this amazing conversation. Really enjoyed it. And have a magical day. Thank you.
Thank you, Toms. Thank you for your time and thank you for the opportunity, my man. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks, Toms.